Professor Schachtschneider, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be talking about the EU, but what a mess it all seems to be in. What's happened to it?
The EU has become a bureaucratic system that we call a supranational confederation of states. But from the legal point of view, it has this tendency to turn into a federal state. And this is one of its essential problems. It's not just an alliance of states anymore, but a federation without legitimate base. It has no nation, no European nation, but nations. Political relations within the Union, yet less democratic all the time. In this situation, we're losing what we call a legal state, which is of the highest priority.
The euro, too, seems to be in big trouble. What's going to happen to it?
The euro will inevitably fail. It was always clear that the euro project would not succeed. Already in 1993, I have processed the Maastricht lawsuit that was mostly against the introduction of the monetary union. Without the consent of the nations comprising the EU, this euro is being used as a political lever to make the EU a superstate that, for example, goes against Russia and at the same time serves as a counterbalance against China, the USA and other economic giants. But this lever was always economically doomed to failure. The Eurozone is comprised of very different, heterogeneous economies that can hardly be an optimal space for a common currency. A combination of internal markets with common currency requires member states to do re-evaluation and devaluation of their currencies, taking into account different levels of productivity and efficiency of their economies. Weaker member states are not competitive, and bailouts cannot help here, as we see it now. A common currency can be introduced only when the member states' economies are convergent and have similar levels of productivity. And that is not the case. It is a long way before we can possibly reach it. The worst thing here is that a common currency is counterproductive. It hampers the aims of economic development. But we still hold on to the euro because we want to make a superstate out of the EU.
The subject of bailouts is also causing a lot of controversy, particularly here in Germany, because they end up having to foot most of the bills. What's going to happen there?
In the BRD, we have never witnessed the situation when the law is not respected as we see it now, in the Europe rescue time. They simply say that there is no other alternative but to sometimes neglect some provisions of the treaties and our constitution. Otherwise, the euro would crash. The euro is really of no value. It is only an instrument and nothing more. Nobody needs this EU, which became a bureaucratic dictatorship. I wish we would have an association of European states and nations, which would be capable of admitting the Russian Federation, a highly important European state. But it is, at this moment, in today's form, absolutely impossible. Vice versa, the EU was born in the times of Cold War and was meant to be against the Soviet Union. The EU wants to be a superstate politically, but it will fail economically.
What caused this current financial crisis in the EU?
The euro has contributed, but also the debt collection policy, which has other causes. The debt existed long before, from the time of the reunification of Germany. But the South European countries that are in trouble now were those that could boost their loan debt because of too favorable and subsidized interest rates. They lived beyond their means. Just think about it. Since the introduction of the euro, the salaries of clerks and state officials rose in Greece at 76%, and in Germany at the same time at 0.9%. And wages in Germany rose at 5.8%, and in Greece at 42%. This is all from credit. The easing of the credit terms, the halving of the interest rates, is a false scent. It itself is the main reason for the debt.
How much do the countries of Europe actually need a single currency?
It is not needed at all. Vice versa, it harms Europe. Only homogeneous economies can manage a common currency. In Europe, it would be only Germany, the Netherlands. The Scandinavian countries would also be suitable, but not France, because its economy has completely different productivity. Everybody knows that it took the USA more than 120 years before it introduced the common dollar. It happened after World War I. A shift to the common currency changes the political circumstances completely, and this process is also hurtful in a social sense, because it is mostly the poorest people who suffer from it. If the introduction of a common currency leads to inflation, and we can hardly think that it leads to deflation, the only way to handle the situation is to convey a monetary reform that will at least harm the donor countries, but also others. It also means that the wealth of the people will be eaten away.
How much would you say the benefits of the euro outweigh its costs?
In the current economic situation, the only advantage of the euro is that we do not have to change our money when we travel to France or Greece. But money change means only insignificant costs compared to the costs that the euro has caused. According to fundamental estimates, the euro cost Germany about 10% of GDP per year. These are all non-transparent transfer operations that are being done in the whole system of European note-issuing banks. Germany also has the wrong interest rate. It should have had another rate according to the productivity of its economy. Interest on savings should have been 2 to 3% higher. Now depositors save almost nothing with the current 0.25% saving rate. It means huge losses for the population. There is not a lot of publicity about it, because it is not a common practice to talk about it on TV, and TV itself knows too little about it and doesn't want people to be disturbed. It is not good for a divergent economic space to build a monetary union. It is though very good for big companies, financial enterprises to begin with, that make a huge profit out of the monetary union.
The EU has grown into a vast and expensive structure, but now costs need cutting. What do you think that Brussels could do more efficiently? What could it get rid of?
I would even say bluntly, the best step would be to abolish the Brussels bureaucracy altogether. It would be even better if parliaments of the member states would make laws, which would be adopted in all countries afterwards. That would be called a common law and would be more democratic. And what we have now, the politicians in parliament no longer know what they decide upon. The laws are being prepared in Brussels, and local politicians are not even capable of seeing them through, because you have to have a specific knowledge of European law in order to understand what it all means. You have to have an intimate knowledge of Europe, its jurisdictions, in order to know what everything means. I don't know of any MPs in Germany who would have any knowledge of European law and could get a satisfactory pass in a European law exam with me.
Now, I know you're a Eurosceptic, but if you had to defend the EU, what would you say that it's brought that's good to Europe?
I'm very much in favor of it. And to my mind, it is a legal obligation that the European nations should work together on a contractual basis. I am a great fan of Kant, who once said that nations should live under treaties, which have to be followed. Treaties constitute the best possible way to secure peace, but the development of contractual relations should not lead to a situation when we lose such achievements of enlightenment as democracy, a legal and social state, and the result, freedom. Democracy and the legal state are more essential principles than European integration. We have a large struggle between these two poles. I doubt that Europe could ever be democratic as a superstate with a federative organization and a population of more than 1 billion people. Only small units can constitute democracy, such as federalism in Germany. Only such units can be democratic, otherwise the cooperation of citizens has no chance. We're experiencing a loss of civic consciousness of people. That is called individualization, but in truth it is isolation. They feel no more influence in policy.
And lastly, I'd like to ask you for a prediction. What do you think the EU is going to look like in the year 2050?
There are a lot of terrible scenarios, of course. I'm optimistic, and that's why I'm advocating a rational Europe policy. I think that the adventures with the euro and the European superstate will come to an end. The dream of those politicians who look forward to integration will also come to an end. I say that in the year 2050, Europe will be a Europe of de Gaulle, a l'Europe d'État, coexistence of the European states on a contractual basis, with cultural unity in diversity. In my opinion, it should also be close economically, but in a free manner. It can also happen that economically close development would eventually lead to the monetary union. But it assumes great changes of mentality and culture of South European nations, and there is nothing more difficult to change than culture.
Professor, thank you very much.